Hello, the internet. Welcome to Open Source Directions, brought to you by OpenTeams, the business-to-business marketplace for all your open source support and services. I'm your host, Henry Badgery, and joining me as the co-host is...
Hi, I'm Tony Fast. I'm a data scientist and open source consultant at Quantsite and a huge Jupyter fanboy. And I'm really excited to introduce Matthew today.
Hi, I'm Matthew Seal. I've been formerly at Netflix, and then before that OpenGov, and most recently I started a new company called Notable, which works in the Jupyter ecosystem to build SaaS solutions. My kind of background has been around working on big data teams and data infrastructure systems and helping with integration so people can more easily do their job.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. We're very glad that you decided to come on the episode. This is going to be our little famous tweet of the week section, where each of our panelists presents a tweet that they've been enjoying recently. So, Matthew, you're up first.
I've got two of them. I'm not sure how we're actually sharing them on the thing, but one of them was just the announcement that we were. One of them was the announcement that we were making a new company, and we just founded it, and we've got funding, and we're running the races to help people with using Jupyter. And then the second one, which was a little unrelated to me, to be a little more what I've enjoyed in the world. I thought I copied the tweet from SpaceX where they had the launch successfully put the astronauts in space. That was so cool to me. So I was really happy to see that happen again in my lifetime. I was getting worried.
Awesome. And Tony, do you have something to share?
I just signed out of all of my social media in the past week, and I've been spending a lot of time checking in on my peoples, and I hope that y'all are doing the same and kind of listening and making sure everybody's staying safe and healthy physically.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. That's very timely thing to say. My tweet of the week is, I think it's probably the same tweet as yours. I have a look. Maybe it's a little bit different, but it's the first time, the NASA astronauts actually entered the space station from a commercially created aircraft. And that, to me, it sort of got lost in the noise of everything that's happening right now. But it's just such a significant moment because this is going to be genuinely a new time for space exploration. Because now that we've had the government's almost like a dark period where not a lot has happened, and now we've got the commercial side of it, and the economic interest there, I think, is really going to drive something and change it. So I just wanted to share that. Now we're going to get on to introduce the project and give you a little bit more information and context. So Jupyter is an organization and a collection of repositories and protocols. They formulate around the notebook offering. Nteract is a branch of exploratory solutions and libraries within the larger Jupyter system. And some of the stats for the two popular packages are from each. So we've got around 10,200 stars for Jupyter on GitHub and 3,300 stars for PaperMail. So as you can tell, they're very, very popular projects. On PyPy and Conda, we have around 9,200,000 downloads for Jupyter and around 218,000 for PaperMail. So isn't that incredible? And some of the large companies, which I thought was very, very interesting, they're using and directly contributing to the software. And those companies are Netflix, Bloomberg, IBM, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, which we all know very well. And so there's some big names. And so I can't wait to get into this episode and learn more.
It's exciting to interview you on this, Matt. It's super cool to see how popular these Nteract and PaperMail projects have become. So I was curious, what was sort of the motivation starting these projects, and how long ago, and what kind of need were you all trying to fill, and is that mission still holding true?
And I think I'll talk a little bit about what different projects and story arcs are here and where they came from a bit. But I think there's also kind of there's a couple different points of need where some things inflect. To give a brief one for you to talk about the overall history, for when I kind of gotten more involved in the Jupyter's ecosystem space, there was kind of this inflection point to make it useful for more cases with companies. So there was kind of this like usage, but there was some gaps and there were some friction points that made it seem like, oh, you never use this for real code, was kind of what was thrown around. And we were able to build some tools to kind of turn that around and be like, no, you really can use this for real code. You just need to solve a few of the smaller problems, and they can be a very useful tool. So some history in there about the Jupyter and Nteract. So Jupyter was an organization where this original notebook code came from. There's other notebook offerings out there we'll talk about later. But it was founded out of the work on the IPython project, which is kind of a project around improving interaction with Python. And the intent was centered on making a better interactive coding experience, especially with exploring results across many different programming languages. So Jupyter, a lot of people don't know, is actually not isolated to just Python. It's built in a way that any language can run inside of it, and there's kernels for pretty much every language that's available. Kernel is the term for the REPL, the backend that runs. And then Nteract was formed actually out of a group of Jupyter devs that wanted to explore some new patterns, develop some new tools, and try to build some experimental opinionated pieces of software. Some of those have been really successful, like PaperMail. I think the Nteract component library has been used a lot more on the corporate side, so maybe not as much on individual side, but they've had lots of successes.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, Jupyter actually supported all these other languages, so that's interesting. I guess you learn something new every day. That's great. I've never used it for Python, so yeah, it's interesting to learn that.
Oh, there's over 100.
Really? Wow.
Supported. It's pretty.
Do people? Is that a common knowledge? Just to a lot of people.
It's decently well known. Like if you look at PaperMail, actually inside, it's got like I think 8 or 10 language translations, so you can pass parameters and it'll know for those 8 or 10 programming languages how to convert them.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, I'm interested in also learning more about the history of the name and the logo.
Yeah, so Project Jupyter is a reference specifically to the 3 core programming languages that were supported by Jupyter at the very beginning, which was Julia, Python, and R. And then it was, as I understand it, a homage to Galileo's notebook recording the discovery of the moons of Jupiter. So the logo is kind of based on the Jupiter and its moons, and kind of has that history of sort of play on words there. Well, Nteract decided to go a little further with play on words, and you'll notice they have a lot of all their projects are kind of different phrasings to make fun of like the metaphor behind the scenes. So like paper mill and scrapbook and bookstore and things like that. And the Nteract is also in that same vein. It's just a play on words for interaction.
Oh, we've got Tony muted. Sorry, I'm just going to unmute you, Tony.
Oh,
there we go. I've unmuted you.
I apologize for that. My
That's all right.
was going. I had to close my Slack. So it sounds like Nteract overlaps with a lot of technology off of solid ideas out there. Are there any sort of alternative projects that apply in this space?
Yeah, so the notebook space is fairly rich. It's actually gotten a lot more rich in the past few years in the sense of like there's a lot of competing ideas. Some of the older ideas that you'll see, most notebook offerings you see out in the wild nowadays are Jupyter based or extensions of Jupyter. So they follow the IPMYB format or the specs or both. But there are some others that don't. In particular, there were some like competition early in the days of Jupyter with Zeppelin, and then there's been Observable and a bunch of others that have tried new stabs into how should a notebook experience be, and maybe a different way of approaching it. And so it's a healthy system of different options.
Okay. One thing I'm going to remind the audience is please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll get to answering those towards the end of the episode. So ask whatever you'd like. And yeah, we'll get to it. One thing I was also curious about is what technology is it built on?
Yeah, so a number of technologies involved in each component. A few notable like pieces of the stack, both for between Nteract and Jupyter, are things around like the kernels use 0MQ for the communication protocol. The Jupyter servers are all the open source ones are Tornado based, so their Tornado is a web framework technology. And the front end for Nteract, for example, is with React and TypeScript. And then some of the other different front ends have some of the older techs in there or other branching techs, and then the or different choices at different points. And then Python is where most of the backend is written in. which is actually where I spend most of my time. So, so I'll kind of be like, yeah, there's some front end things and back end dev. So you'll see the Python is used pretty extensively for doing all the server code, all the like PaperMail is written in Python, even though it translates the requests into the different languages.
Well, you are a fortunate man to be a Python developer who isn't writing JavaScript right now. So
I am writing some JavaScript right now. But it's all good. Actually, I really like in the JavaScript side I think TypeScript and React together have made a big improvements to the quality of life of writing JavaScript. Nice.
Yeah, it seems to impact large organizations developing these technologies. So let's go back like a little bit. What was kind of who sort of set the foundations for the work that you're doing today, and who are some of kind of the key players and influential players to make some of these technologies happen?
Yeah, so this is going to be, I could go on for a very long time of the number of people who've been involved and helped. Like there's a lot of people here, and we'll talk about that later. But the original founding of it, if you want the history of it, was Fernando Perez was was a founder of the organization in 2015. And then there was a lot of other early contributors, but he kind of started up this out of the IPython development group and decided to make this more interface. There are people in the chat that know more about this history than me, so I won't go too far into that because I'll probably say the wrong thing. I actually joined a little later in the story arc, maybe in around 2018, when I started to really get involved and start contributing some code, and then slowly become a maintainer of more parts and help with more things.
Okay, it's great to see that you're a maintainer and also learning about who started it. I'm sure there's a long history. Especially with open source projects, people jumping in, jumping out. But who maintains the project currently?
So there's dozens of people across all the projects. I maintain and help a lot with the backend library maintenance. So I kick off most of the releases for the Jupyter different backend parts, the individual libraries, not the notebook servers themselves. So things like MB Convert and MB Client and Jupyter Client and all these kind of supporting libraries. So I do a lot of maintenance there, and there's a handful of people that are helping on that side. On the PaperMail or on the Interact and PaperMail side of things, I'm doing most of the Python maintenance there. We'd love more maintainers. There's a few people starting to contribute again more, so that'd be awesome to see more people there. And then on the other front there, for like the front ends and the servers and Jupyter Hub and IPy widgets, there's like a dozen or more people, actually more than a dozen people that all contribute there.
How can people get involved?
Yeah, it's actually easier than a lot of people think. They get scared to get involved. I would say the first way you do is, find an issue to help with. There's lots of issues. We try to tag them for on some of the projects for good issues for first-time users.
Uh-huh. That's very handy.
If you don't see any on a project, ping us on for Interact in the Slack group or on Gitter or the email group, and maybe someone can go find some, grab some up and point you to some early starting ones. I think getting involved, even just creating issues, is a really good way to get started. If you create issues, I ran into this thing, and describe it well, and maybe try to find out why a little bit. You don't have to solve a problem, but you can get involved. And it helps us a lot.
Rockin'. So y'all have contributors from all over the place.
Oh yeah, Jupyter Discourse is another one. Sorry.
How has Discourse been working for you? What kind of advantages has Discourse provided you? I know that this isn't part of the question, but
it actually kind of makes a nice little it's not like a Stack Overflow, but it gives a nice place to have conversations and announcements both in the same place. I've been using it more and more. I need to set myself up as a better watcher, because I sometimes miss something if someone pings like, oh, there's this question from a month ago. I'm like, oh, shoot, I missed that. But I think actually it's better than a lot of the other forums we've had for things, because you have a good history of a topic and you can comment on the topic and see what other people said. Whereas some of the others are very like, there's a message and then it goes away, or it's scrolled past history. So I think it gives a little better kind of community feel around how to ask and engage.
Great. Yeah, it seems like you have to have a significant community to build that kind of discussion. So, where are your contributors and users kind of coming from, and how are they finding you all?
Yeah, so like the very early authors and users of notebooks were in the kind of sciences and academic institutes. You see a lot of support from like Berkeley and like other academic groups, and researchers that went more on the research side. I think gradually it's been more and more like corporate app developers, local app developers, and data systems folks starting to chip in and help and contribute more. And then, so at this point, there's users across the board. We have academic, scientific, corporate, even I think, we had, contributors in non-tech spaces too, which is kind of neat. There's education software and machine learning flows and ETL pipelines being built with it. There's satellite monitoring software that I know uses PaperMail, which I was like, oh boy, I really hope I wrote that well.
Comes crashing down.
Yeah, I don't want that. On top of both Jupyter and Nteract, like we get contributions from users from all different backgrounds. The other day, someone had contributed something I had no idea until I saw a tweet that someone was saying, "Oh, good job," and it was from someone who was they were a journalist and they committed a bug fix to like a low-level library, which I thought was cool.
Wow! So it seems like this comes a lot of people coming from plenty of different backgrounds. We're talking even space, which is very interesting to see. I too hope you program that well. But on that topic, is the project participating in any diversity and inclusion efforts?
Yeah, and they do in a constant effort. So I'm going to be, unfortunately, not the person that knows all of these. I'll say a few of them that I know that they've been involved a little closer to things I've seen while I was involved in the project. So in the Jupyter org, especially, I'm not as aware of all the efforts, but I know they did the Outreach program with Berkeley, which was a really good diversity program. And then there's been a lot, they do get involved in a lot of meetups for different diversity groups. I'm not as familiar with all of those. I've only been to a couple of those on the Jupyter side. On the Nteract side, more recently, we've had more things with the Google Summer of Code. We have 3 interns this year, so that's a nice program for getting people in areas that maybe normally wouldn't be able to get a tech job. So really excited for those. They're working on cool things. They're fun people. I really enjoy them. And then Hacktoberfest is done every year, and that gets a lot of people from involved from groups that normally maybe have difficulty getting in. And then Women Who Code was a recent online thing that Nteract was involved with.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for that.
And and just to emphasize too is like the groups try like to be open, both of them. I think Interacting especially has its in its sort of memento that it's really about inclusion and open community being central to the org. So we try to be as open as we can and let people explore and work on things as best they can.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, because I find that people even having the first issues and making it very easy and lowering the barriers for people to actually enter it and start is something which I think is core to the success of, at least the early success of a lot of projects. I just want to remind everyone who's listening, please do not hesitate to ask any questions you want in the chat, and we'll be getting to those very soon. But now we're going to shift gears and we're going to give a project demo. So we're going to be able to see some very cool features of Nteract and basically how it works. Matthew's going to take us through that. So while Matt is getting set up, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsor, Quansight, for sponsoring this episode of Open Source Directions. So thank you very much, Quansight. Quansight, creating value from data. So Matt, when you're ready, take it away.
Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and go actually to the Nteract piece. But yeah, I'm going to do a little quick, I'm assuming people can see my little screen. So here we're going to run. I'm just going to show you a little bit like what a notebook might look like, and what the kind of interaction might be in a notebook, and kind of walk through just a really basic example, and then I'll show you a really basic example of PaperMail running against it, just to kind of show like what the product kind of looks like, and then we'll talk more about the tools that are available and be able to kind of walk around there. So I've got an environment here. I've already got a Python environment, and I've already launched this Nteract notebook here. I just create a new one off of the site. Interact is just a UI. It's maybe like it's one of the UIs that could use some more love more contributors, because I think it has a niche place in the ecosystem. There's classic UI, which you might be more used to, and Jupyter Lab, which is on the Jupyter side is really kind of a more like robust, like has lots of different flags and options. So Interact does a stab at taking an opinionated, like clean interface. And we'd love to see more contributors. So if you're thinking about places to help, this would be a good one. We're going to real quick just kind of like load a data frame, a pandas data frame, and kind of show a visualization with it and just kind of make that really easy. So what do we have to do here? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to pull in Vega. Has these cool data sets that are kind of iconic. The kind of data that was collected used for early data analysis conversations. And then we're going to import. And then we're going to set this little flag here that I'm going to copy in. This flag is just to turn on a feature called Data Explorer. If you don't do this, you'll still get outputs, but this will give us a visualization automatically whenever we print a pandas data frame. Oops. Name pandas. Okay, let's see what I do. Did I not install it into this environment? Let's try and.
You just had as PD, so all you have to do now.
Oh yeah. I just had the wrong one. There we go. Never mind. Sorry, I copy paste the other. Cool.
I like being like, oh, Panda helped me do this. It's it reads.
Yeah, we got it. So all good. And then what we're going to do here is we're just going to go ahead and pull a data set from this. This is really simple, right? Data.cars. So cars is like this little data set that that's in the data. It kind of shows cars from the 90s and 80s and some stats about them, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to call expanded output so we can see this really well. So you see by default, we have this kind of chart of data. It's kind of just rendered. It's got 3 pages. We can set how many rows. It's got some horsepower, acceleration, what year it was made. So you can see some like
Nice.
all the years and stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to click over to like one of these visualizations. And this is kind of a cool little tool for doing visualizations on this type of data. And so Pandas data frames can be converted to this tool called Data Explorer, which is another open source tool. We're going to be working on a lot in the future. So I'm pretty happy with this there. So we can do things like, miles per gallon per cylinder. It's not as interesting because you can see there's 4, 6, or 8. So if you notice, the fewer cylinders you have, generally the more miles per gallon you get. But we can do things like, maybe miles per gallon based on horsepower. And then this is maybe a more interesting graph where you can see things like, how these two things correlate. And then, we can quickly see, maybe we also want to have, the weight of the car is the size of the bubbles. So you can see heavy cars, have high horsepower, but generally fewer miles per gallon. But there's some exceptions. Like here we have this little tiny Volkswagen with gets 26 miles per gallon. And it has very little horsepower, but then this we have a BMW that has more horsepower but has the same miles per gallon, and so it's a little heavier of a car. But so things like this you can do sort of quick visualizations, and you can do things like trend lines and colors and all that jazz.
The lack of code that you put into doing this demo is astounding.
Yeah, Data Explorer definitely emphasizes the ability to kind of do data exploration without having to write a lot of code. I could show you also, the version of doing something similar like this with Matplotlib or the plethora of other programming language options. But yeah, Data Explorer lets you explore data pretty quickly and cleanly.
How many lines would it be with Matplotlib?
To do something like this, to get with the bubble size and the all the clicks I just did, maybe 10 or 20.
Wow, that's incredible.
If you knew what you're doing.
Yeah. In the middle, you might see like the HoloViz ecosystem being a little bit shorter, but there's a lot of awesome stuff that Altair does. I mean, once you have the schema, you know a lot about your data, and that's part of the struggle that we have with notebooks. Kind of is what's in the data.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and here we're gonna do a little more demo. So normally you would have like a data set that it's accessible by key, but instead we're gonna do this thing where we also we're going to change this to I'm going to do a get attribute. Right. But instead, what we're actually going to do is we're going to use a new variable. I'm not going to put a placeholder. You can make a parameter still and put a placeholder, but for sake's demo, I'm just going to do this real quick like this. So we're going to do data, and we're going to do call this DS name, right? And we're going to save this. And what we're going to do is we're going to change what screen we're sharing. One sec, we're going to change screens. So we've got a little terminal window here. You can see the notebook server is running right above me. And the here what we're going to do is run a little PaperMail command. So PaperMail, and we're going to do this untitled one. And we're going to do an output, and we're going to say this is going to be iris IPYNB. And we're going to do -p, and then what do we call that thing? DS name, I think. All right, so we've now saved out a new notebook. So let me go load that up and then share the screen.
So PaperMail is not doing all of this necessarily, but it's putting some nice things together to make this happen, right?
Yeah. So PaperMail, what it's doing is it's a headless execution. So it just executed that whole notebook end to end. And let me share the screen so you can see what the output was. It executes the whole notebook as though if you were a browser that said restart and run all on a notebook. But what it does is actually isolates the input from the output. So here it's actually generating a new notebook document and leaving the old one alone.
Cool. So when you've had these things running in production, how many times would people be running really large simulations with these things?
Sometimes you do very simple things. Sometimes you do really long things. I mean, we had ranges from things that would execute in seconds to things that would execute in days or up to a week. And at Netflix in particular, we had, so we had moved all of our, this is going to sound crazy. I've said this before a lot, but we moved all of our ETL to be running on top of notebooks. So every ETL job you try to schedule, if you said like, I want to run a Spark job, I want to run this data transport, I want to run my custom code, we ran it on top inside of a notebook. So we had notebook templates, and then we let that, so users could say, hey, here's my Spark thing I need to run. We would wrap it in a notebook. If they had a notebook already, we could just run that as well.
Why was that?
So
Why
we
did they
ran,
make that shift?
Yeah. So we actually made that shift for them, and it was kind of transparent at first, and then it slowly became, because the emphasis there was to actually, rather than making our users have to change what they like using and move to keep using what they've been using without like rewriting their code. So for notebook users already using notebooks, they didn't have to rewrite what they were doing. They could just schedule their notebook directly. And this is what like PaperMail did here with like this example. We injected this DS name equals iris, and then you can see down here we actually have the iris data set now loaded because we loaded by a parameter into the code. But it's actually code. If I rerun this whole thing, it's going to do the same thing, right? So I can just rerun this code and it will do the exact same execution because I injected as code. So the other reason that that we really adopted this more from, it was this kind of idea of notebooks everywhere. Like, why not use a notebook? Was because it makes a really good integration tool. Like, you can inject all the parameters that were involved in your job execution. You can rerun and reproduce exactly what was run on that scheduled job by just copying the notebook and rerunning it. So you get all this as like a single document that represents what you wanted to do, how you configured it, what the outcomes were, what the graphs and logs were, and how to rerun it all in one document. So you reduce the number of tools you need to know to interact and debug down to one.
Almost like a placeholder, and like perfect this template, and then you can just reuse it as you will.
Yep. And you see here, actually, I haven't even started the Python kernel, but I can still do things on here. Like, I've already changed the graph type, and I can set like, you can tell sepal length versus sepal width. And then we can do things like, let's do the petal width is the bubble size. So you can do, I'm doing this without actually running any code because the data was actually saved into the notebook for this data frame. So you can just load the data explorer right off of it. We actually use this a lot because we do Netflix, and we'll do this at Notable as well. You can make read-only interfaces that can read the scheduled outcomes, and then you can still kind of look and explore the data without having to run any actual code.
Nice. Okay.
Cool. So, yeah.
Are you done with the project demo?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to show briefly, like, kind of some of the flexibility of those two tools we've kind of been talking about in Jupyter and the PaperMail. And then I think we want to spend a little more time talking about, like, what are all the tools and how do they relate to that type of ecosystem.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, maybe we'll go on to, maybe you can discuss that in the project roadmap discussion, which we're now going to have. So we're going to, again, shift gears. And this is another fun segment for those of you who are here for the first time, where basically we're going to be talking about Matt's going to be talking about where Nteract is going. I'm going to be listening and learning, and what future directions it'll be taking. So with that, Matt, can you tell us a bit about the directions that Nteract is heading?
Yeah, so Nteract is at this point, like, we're kind of we have lots of projects in exploration mode. So if you look at Nteract, you might first think it's only a desktop app. Desktop app is it's a proof of concept, and it's a cool usable tool for lots of individuals. But the Nteract group and the desktop app is running that Nteract interface I just showed you in an Electron app, so you can run it as a little, install it and run it anywhere. But the larger ecosystem of Nteract is actually a collection of libraries. There's the Nteract UI, which is the front-end component library. So it defines all the things you kind of just saw as individual React components that you can reuse. And so that's like actually the most valuable thing in Nteract, I would say, even though it's the least visible to people. It's used a lot, and it's actually what is kind of the differentiator between that UI and other UIs. Is that you can take the pieces you want and rebuild your own. And then on the backend side, there's a whole plethora of Python libraries that do different tasks in there that we'll talk about. But in terms of roadmap, I would say that for the Nteract side, I think the roadmap there is to get that Nteract beta I just showed you kind of polished more, get it kind of more productionization type of features. So, like, there's some quality of life things in there that are friction points. So trying to get more contributors to help kind of fix the few, like, usability issues that are in there and make it a real, like, actual viable, like, well-built and well-constructed UI. Today, it's a UI you can play with, but there's definitely friction points you hit and small bugs that need to be fixed. And the framework behind it is really cool. So it's got a good base. So I think that roadmap there is really making sure it's usable for people to reuse the components better and making sure that UI gets improved over time. So there's been a grant recently on the making the desktop UI experience a lot better that's being worked on right now. So that's really cool. And then on the back end side of things, I would say PaperMail is kind of at this point is mostly well matured and feature complete. There's some edges about how far we want to push PaperMail to encompass. So the roadmap there is kind of about seeing what's needed in the community and then figuring out a way to do it that's opinionated, doesn't lead people to making mistakes, and is flexible enough for people to reuse. And then the other libraries around it, like Scrapbook and Testbook and some of those others, are really in, like, beta status where they're usable. So I'd love the kind of roadmap for them is to kind of get them feature complete, get them 1.0 releases that have, like, everything. So we feel like, hey, it's a completed project. And then from there, like, continue with small things that people want to have. So happy to have more people lead on those types of things and contribute. And then the Jupyter side, there's a bajillion things. So I know where to start on that one. And there's a lot more projects. The back end there is just kind of like, please keep things going and moving forward. I think some formatting improvements. So things like, I think one of the roadmappy things a lot of people want to see the spec move forward. So the Jupyter Spec have some new improvements for things that have been asked for a long time. I'm going to maybe do a push, try and get some IDs in the cells, and that'd be really cool. And things like that. So I think there's some movement there. And then Jupyter Lab and Binder and some of those others have had their own kind of roadmaps that I'm less familiar with.
Awesome.
Yeah, I can talk more about those individual things or individual projects as well. We can dig in if you want.
Yeah, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, we got time.
I'm curious what you're talking about or what you're referring to when you're talking Jupyter Spec.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things that's made Jupyter so successful. There's two factors of it. Well, three. I think one is they had a community component where many people could get involved, and especially Nteract has tries to really emphasize that aspect. There's also the Jupyter is component it's component based, even if it's not like you can inherit and override or extend or plug in, especially in Nteract stuff, you can plug and play anything. So the emphasis there was to make it so that it was interoperable. I have like this idea of a contract for how each part works, and I can match against that contract, which means companies are able to adopt the technology easily because they have some extra business logic. They just have to plug in where that business logic applies and leave everything else the same open source that everyone's used to. And then on the actual spec, the file format, the IPMYB file, is a well-defined spec file where it says what is included in that document to specify what a notebook is. And so a lot of groups, even non-Jupyter groups, actually use the IPMYB spec to define their notebook document and what's inside of it. So it'll have things like your cells and the metadata about the cells and any like flags that are on and execution times and the kernel you used and the runtime information. So all that stuff gets baked into the that notebook document. And it's been kind of a static set of fields for a couple years. There's only been a few minor additions. So there's been some emphasis to kind of move that forward. And then you might also hear from spec, also from the idea of kernel communications. There's also protocol. The protocol in which how the backend component, the thing actually running your notebook code, how it communicates with a server or a PaperMail headless execution, like that communication protocol. That's evolved a little in terms of how it's like quality of life improvements. So like parallel execution works better and things like that, but it hasn't had any spec movements either. And there's some demand to have some more message types available. So those are kind of the spec changes that I think will be good for the ecosystem for everyone. It's like it's an ubiquitous improvement that we could do. The risk is when we change things, even things like I fixed bugs in the low level code, and sometimes fixing those bugs causes disruption for people who code relied on that bug being there to keep running. And it can sometimes be a big disruption, like things like you shouldn't have been able to save that file because it was like you couldn't set the permissions, so you're leaking secrets. And then we introduced something that patched that over and made it so, hey, it will actually check that the secrets are saved. And then all these Docker on Windows installations all started failing, which was really frustrating because they couldn't set the permission bits. Things like that. So you can have it is a little bit of a stressful thing to push us forward, but for the good of the whole ecosystem, I think we should do it.
Okay, awesome. Well, then now we'll move on and we'll be answering some of the questions from the audience. So yeah, thank you very much for asking those questions. Well,
I feel like this question could go pretty far, judging that we've already talked about satellites. But what are some interesting use cases from that you've seen from Jupyter and Nteract? Anything that you'd like to highlight that really sticks out in your experience?
Yeah, I think there's some really awesome things people don't know you could do. Like one was like people were doing instrument monitoring, because it's really handy to have something where they just continuously run instrument monitoring and have a visualization of what it was. So we were doing that with PaperMail. I think that was the satellite use case, though they didn't talk too much about the internal details when they asked me questions. So that one was like they had to continuously monitor and then output. And it was really easy to just look at a notebook real quick to see what the current status of things, or go back and see what happened at 5 hours ago with what was the status of the metrics at that time. So it was like a very low friction effort to do monitoring. Some ones that people maybe don't know as much as well. A lot of like operational tasks in a very similar vein for monitoring or doing tasks against systems. At Netflix, for example, we scheduled a lot of our operational tasks against the scheduler and adjacent systems, but just making a notebook that like cleaned up things and it recorded what it cleaned up. So you have something like a TTL on some data, or an old like set of content, or something you need to keep an eye on until it's all done. You can just set up a notebook to check the status of that thing and report on it. And you just run that every hour, every day, whatever the cadence is that makes sense. And then that's a really handy tool, because you don't need to like define a bunch of infrastructure and everything. You just write a notebook, and then you write the notebook to ask what's the status of the thing, and you can go look at it anytime. It's not like a full replacement for a metric system, but it's a good hop in for like low friction, low consequence things you want to keep an eye on. Some other use cases that I thought were really cool that someone told me. There's one group that uses it for doing threat investigation, so like security work, where when they have a security attack detected and they're looking and searching for what that attacker has done in the system or how far they penetrated, so a penetration report, they actually do all the work for analysis in a notebook. And at the end, they just save that notebook, and that's the record of how they found what was there and what the user had accessed. And it was a reproducible document that had the logs of everything associated with that attack. I thought that was a really cool use case for Jupyter.
Yeah, definitely. That's exciting. And it seems like it's a little bit of everything. A little bit of everything, which is very
I mean, it's an interactive code environment, right? And the reason why it gets used in a lot of different ways is because you can have logs, visualizations, and the code you use to execute all in one place. And it has this, the cell concept is a really nice construct for exploration. And so it also makes a really good concept for integrations, because before, when you have large programs, you oftentimes don't know where messages are coming from or what they're associated with, because this is this huge code base and there's a big log file that's a megabyte long. I don't know what goes to what without. And then you get like log lines, you have to go trace them. Here in notebooks, because you're breaking code up in little like mini function like units, you get a lot of benefits for both integrations and for exploration, because I can focus on just this part that was involved in what crashed or what didn't work or what I was looking at visually.
Yeah, awesome. The next question is from Zach. Does PaperMail have a way to inject parameters or values into Markdown cells?
Not into Markdown cells, no. You're probably hinting a little bit at the like RStudio type functionality. That'd be a cool feature. I think getting Markdown to work more like the kind of R users are used to would be really cool. There's been talk about it, but I think someone needs to go spearhead that. Generally, what it does is it actually just injects code or injects the parameters as code. Now, that being said, because PaperMail is written entirely plug and play, like every aspect of how PaperMail runs is either a registered action or a plug and play like class you need to give it. So what that means is you can actually implement your own. In this case, it'd probably be the translator or the engine, depending on how far you want to go, where you can overwrite what those parameters are used for. So some teams do this, for example, to change it. So like if you inject code into your notebook, if they detect that that it's a table name as a string, they'll convert that to a pandas data frame automatically for you that loads the table, or a lazy data frame or something. So you can do all sorts of stuff like that and change how the behavior is without having to rewrite the open source. You can just copy one of those components that plugs and kind of extend it to your use case. And sometimes those get merged back. Sometimes you say, that's really awesome, you should document that and tell people about it.
Okay, awesome. Tony?
So Jared just asked a question, and it kind of overlapped with mine. Again, I'm really excited about your company starting. But as you're starting Notable, it depends a lot on different ecosystems and stuff. How do you see your company as taking a leadership role in open source? And how do you see this partnership between a company and an open source playing out for you all?
Yeah, I think everyone on the team has worked with open source and maintained open source code from the starting group, and we all really value open source. We want to be a partner to open source. We don't want to be a dictator over it. We don't want to be someone who just takes use of it and doesn't contribute back. So really, our emphasis is going to be is our role with the open source is hopefully to be as an engagement partner, to be able to bring other people together to talk about the open source. So we want to be able to be, hey, we're experts on this set of open source, and we will contribute into that, both Interact and probably some to Jupyter itself. We'll be contributing back code for that ecosystem, but that means we know enough there to have the basis for conversations with other people. So we want to bring in, Netflix was doing this a lot back like a year and a half ago. We were bringing other companies that were solving similar problems and talking with them. And we want to do the same thing, and like bring other companies that are having issues within Jupyter they're trying to solve, or on top of Jupyter, or use cases, or things they need if they were in the spec or in a library that everyone would benefit from. We want to help facilitate those conversations. And so really the role we see as being as facilitators to improving the open source as a company.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. That was a great answer. The next question is from Carol. Thank you, Carol. What standard or spec would you address first? notebook format, messaging protocol, or something else?
I think notebook format is the one that needs the most move forward. There's some key things in there that are missing that everyone keeps re-implementing. And so the more people do that, the more they kind of fracture out of Jupyter. So for me, I think getting improvements on like identifying notebooks and cells and and tracking like what happened in that cell better. And making a more general space for that would be really good. There is a generalization in the format for this metadata space where you can do any namespace field on cells or on the notebook itself. The problem is for some of these things that are really common, you need it in the actual spec because everyone implements it slightly differently. And then when you need to write your React component that respects that field, you need to look at 5 different fields, and it's not great because they move and change. So I think getting notebook format moved forward a little bit would be the best thing. I think on the there's probably some small things on the communication spec that could be done soon. But I think that one, like, it's working, and the things that are needed are maybe more niche, even if they're important.
Okay, awesome. Well, now we're going to move on. We're getting towards the end of the episode. But first of all, before we end, we've got our famous, world famous rant and rave section where we each get 15 seconds to either rant or rave about a certain topic. Imagine it's like a soapbox. So Matt, you're up.
All right. So before I actually do my real rave, I do want to say, like, we kind of haven't really talked about the world affairs right now. I think if you have my 1 second on that one is, if you haven't and you are able to, contribute or donate to a group that you think will help with the world situation, I'm going to be doing that and more and more. And I encourage others to. On the maybe not world affairs and keeping it on a lighter subject, I think being nice to maintainers would be, you be nice to your maintainers. Most of us are working our free time on these projects. Like, all the stuff I did in Jupyter was literally on my free time. And we care very deeply about the success of these projects. And I've seen a lot of people get burned out on the constant criticism and argumentative behavior that a few individuals sometimes bring. Most people are great, but occasionally it really does a number on people's mental health. And I've seen so many people get burned out to the point where they stop engaging on software entirely. So be nice to your maintainers. They're trying to do the best they can. Help them out. Don't fight with them, please.
All right, and Tommy, you're up. 15 seconds notebox.
That's great. I'm just going to follow up on what Matt said, just more in general, because I'm a user, not a maintainer. But, look out for your mental health. Look out for your family's mental health. Look out for your friends' mental health. Be patient with people. Listen to them. And, regard your privilege when you have these conversations. And do what you can to help, donate, contribute to open source, do something productive. And Godspeed.
That was beautiful. Yeah. It's semi-rant, semi-rave, but I've been meditating every day for 35 days now. And I just get so frustrated because I'm like, okay, am I doing it right? It doesn't feel like I'm doing it right. And yesterday was the first day where I felt like I sort of shut everything off and was just zenned out focusing. And I was like, wow, okay, it took 35 days. I don't know if I'll be able to do it again, but it felt good. And I wanted to have a little mini rant rave for that. But that's all we have time for today, sadly. But thank you very much, everyone, for watching and listening. And Matt, thank you very much for joining us. You can find us on Twitter at OpenTeams Inc., at OpenTeams, sorry, and at Quansight AI. Matt, so where can people find you and Jupyter and Nteract?
Yeah, so on Twitter, at CodeSeal is a good way to go paste me or get a hold of me. At Jupyter, or at project_Jupyter is the Jupyter kind of tag, and at Interact.io, all one word, is the tag. If you want to connect to us on more personally or on a back and forth type of thing, also the Slack is slack.interact.io on the Interact side, and we pay attention and try to respond there too. And then, of course, on GitHub issues.
Awesome. Okay, so if you liked what you saw today, then please go to our YouTube channel and like and subscribe to see more of this kind of content. It really does help, and you'll be able to stay up to date with the next episode. You'll never miss a beat. So we look forward to all of you joining us next episode. Join us again for our next discussion. We'll be with a recall graph. So thanks very much, everyone. Have a good day and goodbye. Happy Friday.
Thank you all.
Happy Friday.